basic tissue and basic hormones and functions and things like that. And so, so herbs work kind of across all those lines. And then we're going to be talking about those herbal categories as well. Okay, so to start, you know, one of the reasons that we don't talk about menstruation is that it is a taboo subject. And what that has done is, and I think honestly that this is partially because of advertising in our culture, but it's made it so that a lot of moms don't talk to their daughters about menstruation. A lot of, in our culture, mostly where we get the information is from advertising, right? And so we will see ads in magazines or on the screen, and this kind of sets us up for what to expect and what we should think about that, right? And so this is true for men and for women, for boys and for girls, that we all get those messages about menstruation. And I also teach Celebrating Menarche, which is first menstruation class. And it's been really kind of sad and also interesting to me that a lot of the girls that attend that class are already have a lot of trauma and a lot of shame around their menstrual cycles. And you know, I think a lot about it honestly, and like, how can I catch these girls sooner? Or how like, what's the right age to, you know, start introducing this topic in a way like before the advertising gets really in our heads and kind of gives us an opinion about our own bodies, which feels like usually there's a lot of shame or embarrassment around that. And I honestly feel like it's about 3 years old that we need to start introducing that subject. And it can be super simple in very basic terms, but to slowly introduce before the child is really aware of like those cultural messages, which, like I said, often come from marketing and advertising. So, what is normal? And that is the question that I actually had to, and this was many years ago now, but I actually researched it to figure out what was normal because it's not something that we talk about, right? It's kind of another one that we don't talk about. And this is, you know, not what this class is about, but is bowel movements, you know, or other bodily functions where it's like people often, I'll see clients and things like that, and they have no idea what's normal or what's regular. And so, so this is very true for menstruation. And what ends up happening is that whatever a person's experience is with their own menstruation ends up seeming like normal to them, right? But there are certain key things that we can look at when we're kind of looking at what's normal and healthy for a menstrual cycle, and we can actually gauge what is normal and look at our own cycle and say, oh, I might need to adjust that a little bit. And actually herbs and diet and exercise do a lot to impact, and stress is the other thing. Those all do a lot to impact the menstrual cycle. And so we actually have a lot of control over that. But first we need to know kind of what we're shooting for, right? And that's the menstrual map. That's what that's about. So it is not normal to feel a lot of pain. And anytime we feel a lot of pain in our bodies, that's a sign, that's the body letting us know something is wrong, something's going on. And it's a way for the body to say, hey, could you pay attention to this? Like, I need some, you know, I need some attention here. And can you help me out? And the only way I can communicate with you really is like, ouch, it hurts. And so painful menstruation is not normal. That's a good sign that something's going on. Usually it's something that can be really easily adjusted with diet or lifestyle, and maybe throwing a few herbs in there as well. So one of the things that I love to do, and I love for girls to do this, is to keep a journal. And adults too. Like, this is so, so informative. And so if we can just write down, um, and it doesn't just have to be with menstruation, it can be, what you're eating, what you're drinking, how you're feeling that day, what's going on that day with your body. Did you have a bowel movement? What was it like? How many glasses of water did you drink? Did you menstruate, and what was that like? Right. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here. But if you can write those things down in a journal, then you can start seeing patterns. And and then sometimes we see things we didn't realize before. And then the other thing that can happen is when we start um, writing them down, we can start to see shifts and changes. And so as we start applying our tools of diet and lifestyle, or herbs, or stress reduction, or things like that, we can see things start to shift and look back and go, wow, that really did change. That made a difference, right? And so it gives you actually a lot more control over your health and well-being. And I think that's extremely empowering and super exciting. So I know sometimes in our culture, we talk about menstruation being the curse, and which actually is a saying that kind of breaks my heart. But I actually think it's like the blessing, right? In that we have this tool that if we know how to use it, we can evaluate what is working and what isn't working for our body in particular. And there's no one else in the whole world that can tell you what's best for your body more than your own body can. So I think it's just an amazing and super exciting idea. And that's what I would love for people who bleed to come across with. The takeaway is like, this is a gift. And if we can appreciate it and enjoy it in a way that helps to move us towards better health, even better. Okay. So what does normal menstruation look like? And one of the things we're looking for is the color of the blood. And what we want to see is bright red blood. And this is a good sign that circulation is happening really well around the uterus. And the other thing that's around the uterus, right, is the digestive system and the urinary tract. It's the whole lower abdomen, or the abdominal cavity. And so if we can see that the blood is nice and bright red, we can pretty much assume that circulation around the pelvis is happening really nicely. Oxygenated blood, fresh, nice blood is getting in there, and that's really wonderful. So that's one of the things we want to shoot for, is like that good pelvic circulation. So bright red blood is a good sign. Dark, like a maroon, or dark, even like brown colored blood, that's a sign that probably there isn't quite enough good circulation happening in the pelvis. And there's herbs that can help with that. We can do things like sitz baths. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the herbal section at the end. Some clots are normal, but we don't want to see anything really over the size of about a quarter, like the coin. And if we're seeing large clots, that's a sign that maybe we're bleeding a little too much, a little too heavily, because that's when the blood really starts to clot like that. So I would say we would want to look for a little bit less clots and things that are smaller than, say, a quarter in size. And then the amount of blood, and this is always tricky depending on what you use to catch blood and menstruation. It's hard. It's not like you can get out your little measuring cup and measure it, right? And so this is a little bit tricky to tell. But it's somewhere around 2 ounces. And what you can do, I don't have one here, but like a measuring cup, right? So I think 2 ounces is a quarter cup. And then 8 ounces is 1 cup. right? And so that's about the range that you want. If we have very, very scanty menstruation, that's a sign that that blood lining, which is called the endometrial lining, is not building up well enough. If it's very heavy menstruation, that's a sign that we're probably bleeding a little bit too heavily, right? And that's also called flooding, or it can be called hemorrhaging. And some women have really, really heavy menstruation, and they always have, and they just don't know that that's not normal, right? And actually, I don't like that word normal, but I have a hard time thinking of another word for that. But it's not, I can't think of another word for it. But anyway, if you're losing that much blood all the time, your body really has to recover to make a lot more blood. And so women or people who bleed really heavily might experience anemia, they might experience fatigue and tiredness. And so we want to see if we can reduce that menstruation a little bit so that they don't have to rebuild so much, literally like rebuild red blood cells that much in their body. So here's an advertising. I'm going to read this all to you all. This is a very old advertisement for menstrual products, right? And this, but I have this up because what I want to say is that we, this is where we have come from in this culture, thinking about menstruation. So here's that: leaking. Permit our new unspeakables, disposable, hygienic underbandage to gently absorb milady's foul drippings during her less dainty time of the month. Far less cumbersome than the wire-constructed strap-on secretion cages. That sounds horrible, doesn't it? Unspeakables will leave ladies as free as a soap bubble, wafting ever heavenward. Available at most pharmacies in discreet, featureless gray boxes for your privacy. So I know that advertisements these days are not that bad, but that basic concept is still around. And if we think about how we discuss menstruation in very whispered tones to each other, right? And there's all kinds of words and phrases like code words, right, for menstruation. And I bet you guys in the chat even can some of those and you can write them down. But the curse is the one that always makes me the saddest. All right. And why? So why do we have these? What is the benefit of having this kind of information in advertising and marketing? Negative information, negative connotations, right? It's shameful, it smells bad, you don't want anyone to know, you certainly don't want anyone to see it, right? And if you're going to tell somebody about it, it's going to be like your friend in a whisper, right? Um, and and these menstrual products will let you wear your white pants and do cartwheels and nobody has to know, right? So that is that kind of feminine hygiene that we're talking about. And a lot of these things are not, the reason I put it in quotations is because a lot of these things are not hygienic at all for the reproductive system. And they're actually very counterproductive to health and wellness for the reproductive system. So sprays, douches, wipes, a lot of those have synthetic fragrances. They can actually be quite irritating to the tissues, those mucous membranes, very sensitive tissues around the vulva and the vagina. So this advertising, when we start hearing about all these negative things about our bodies, about our reproductive systems, it's honestly impossible not to take that on. And I honestly believe that it affects our health and our well-being. It affects our reproductive systems. So I think one of the reasons that so many women have so many reproductive health or menstrual issues is because they've internalized kind of that shame and that embarrassment about their own bodies, right? In more ways than just the reproductive system, but certainly in that way. So what do we use instead? So a long time ago, I think I was probably around 19, I realized like, oh, look at these messages that we're getting all the time. And there were magazines, which I don't know if they still are around, but like 17 magazine, for instance, which was at that time like aimed at teenagers. And I used to read it. And there were all these ads in there for like, pads and tampons and stuff. And they were all really negative, really, really negative. And I started to kind of realize that and go, wow, first of all, I really don't like that. And secondly, I'm not going to give them my money so they can tell me that, And so I started using cloth menstrual pads back then. That was what was available. And I was excited. I didn't have a lot of money. I was in college and I would like buy one every month pretty much, and then I had this nice little collection. So there's all kinds of great alternative menstrual products, and a lot of them are so much healthier for our own bodies and so much better for the planet. I also just want to let you guys know, I love kind of doing a plug for Women's Voices for the Earth, which is a national nonprofit group that works, and they actually are here in Missoula, but they work for all of us, right? And they really focus on, and not that they don't work for men too, but they really focus on women's health, and they look at like makeup and nail polish and cleaning products and menstrual products, right? And they look at all the chemicals that are in those products, and they lobby manufacturing companies to not use those. And they have done some powerful, profound work. I'm a huge fan of theirs, and they have this whole um, uh, I can't think of the word, but like thing that they do called Detox the Box, and it's all about menstrual products, right? So they would be really cool to, and you can see their little their website down at the bottom there. A really neat resource to check out. Okay, so now we're going to get into the fertility cycle. And this is the hormonal cycle that women, I'm just going to go with women, even though I hope you will forgive me if I don't mean to offend at all, but anybody who is cycling, right, with this, it's not everyone considers themselves a woman, which is, uh, anyway, okay. So I am trying to be thoughtful about that. So day number 1 is the first day of menstruation. And that's the beginning of the cycle, right? So that's when we consider the first day. And menstruation, again, we want to last about at least like 3 to 5 to even 7 days. Longer than 7 days, I didn't say this before, is we could consider hemorrhaging or excessive bleeding. And so if menstruation is really, and I'm not talking about spotting, right, on either side, I'm talking about the flow itself. If that's longer than about more than 5 to at the top 7 days, that's something else we want to look at and say, how can we shorten that? And we're going to be talking about some herbs that we can use for that a little bit later. So anyway, at the very day number 1, we have menstruation. It usually lasts about 3 to 5 to up to 7 days. And during this time, estrogen then starts to rise. And this first half of the cycle, we can see it says the follicular phase. It's also called the estrogen phase. And that is when, and the reason it's called the follicular phase is it means the egg is in the follicle, right? So follicle stimulating hormone is increasing. This is increasing estrogen and helping to ripen the eggs in the ovaries. It goes to both ovaries. They both start to grow some eggs. At some point, one of those eggs, or sometimes 2, are ripe and ready to be ovulated, and that's the act of when the egg actually like breaks out of the ovary. That's ovulation. So when an egg is ripe, luteinizing hormone will spike up just for 12 to 24 hours. Ovulation will happen where the egg gets released out of the ovary, and then the progesterone phase starts. And the progesterone phase is fixed. It's about 10 to 14 days. The estrogen phase, and I want to say the progesterone phase is also called the luteal phase or the luteal phase. And it's only after ovulation happens. The estrogen phase can be variable. It's not fixed. And so sometimes stress will make it be longer. For a lot of women, it's about the same amount. And when we think of like a, medically textbook kind of cycle, we have about 14 days in the estrogen phase and about 14 days in the progesterone phase, which makes about a 28-day cycle. It doesn't have to be exactly 28 days, but if it's, for me, if I'm working with someone, if it's shorter than about 26 or longer than about 30-ish, then I start to think about, they're spending, a lot more time in the estrogen phase or a lot more time in the progesterone phase. And I might want to adjust that a little bit and help them kind of balance that out. Okay, so those are the hormones. Everyone makes estrogen, everyone makes progesterone, everyone makes luteinizing hormone, and it's just the amount that we make them in that differs. Okay, so I already talked about this. How we feel about our bodies, I believe, directly impacts our health. And we need positive messages and positive role models to help us feel good about our bodies. And I think that's true not just for menstruation, but kind of all around, and not just for our bodies either, right? But it really, really helps to have women older than us who we can look up to as we're young and get the information that we need, get accurate and clear information, and watch them feeling good about their bodies, I think is really, really important. All right, so here is the menstrual map. And as we've been talking about the start of this, and this is actually a download that you guys can all download this exact map, so you can all have this. So you don't need to worry about writing it down or anything like that. We're going to give you a link for this at the end of the class. So this is kind of what I designed, this visual to help us. It's just a quick kind of chart to be able to understand quickly how to use an herb. So you'll see at the top is the estrogen phase, right? And that's also called the follicular phase. And then we have ovulation, which is when luteinizing hormone is high. And then at the bottom, we have the progesterone phase. And what I basically did is broke it down into those phases, and then I broke it down into specific categories that went with those. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through all of these categories and talk about, we won't get to every single herb, but we'll get to every single category and talk a little bit about the herbs that we can use for these different issues. So the thing that I liked about it being round like this is I feel like the cycle is always like drawn out as a line. And to me, that's not really, it's more circular, like it happens over and over again. So that's why I wanted to make it a circle. So the first kind of section that we're going to talk about is menstruation. And there's two different topics to go over when we talk about menstruation. And the other thing that I want to say before we get specifically into the herbs is that every category of herbs on the map has herbs. So the herbs that I've listed there are examples of herbs that do these things, but there are more herbs that do those same things than just what I've listed. And also, not every herb will work wonderfully for every person. And so sometimes you have to do a little bit of experimenting to figure out what's going to be the right herb for you. And oftentimes it's more than one. I really like to use them in combination as well. So the first issue with menstruation is pain, right? Which again, we talked about earlier, is a sign that something isn't working so well. And it can just be a bit of inflammation around the reproductive system, or it can be that the bleeding is heavy and there's large clots, and those have to come out, which can hurt. The little hole called the Oz, which runs between the uterus and the vagina, it's really tiny. And if large clots of blood are going through, it can be painful and cause cramping and things like that. So that's a really nice thing to kind of think about. If there is pain happening, there's a lot that we can do for that. So some of these herbs are really excellent. And the other thing I think a lot about is diet. So exercise is, first of all, very, very helpful. And secondly, diet. And particularly, I look at a group of foods that contain methylxanthines. And methylxanthines are plant components. Caffeine is a methylxanthine. So a lot of times, women who have bad menstrual cramps and things like that don't do very well with methylxanthines. And so taking them off of like coffee and black tea and cola beverages and chocolate can actually really reduce symptoms. And sometimes, the cycle is around a month long. And so sometimes one cycle isn't enough time to like kind of reset. And I like to watch for about 3 to 6 months or 3 to 6 cycles to really evaluate. But a lot of times people will see improvement. Let's get back to the herbs. So this is hops on the right hand side there, and you use the strobules, same for making beer, but they're very bitter and they're really help with pain. And they're also sedating, and so really nice for like sleep and that kind of thing. Good nerving. A lot of the herbs in this category are antispasmodics, which makes sense, right? To reduce kind of that cramping that can happen with the uterus or the Oz, that little hole. So black cohosh, black haw, cramp bark, wild yam are all really nice for smooth muscle cramping. The uterus and the fallopian tubes are smooth muscles. Um, and then we can think about hops, like I said, good for pain. Valerian is also an antispasmodic and good for pain. Rose, which is an herb that I love and has a really beautiful affinity for the reproductive system, and also the heart. And I love, like, especially if there has been a lot of trauma or around the reproductive system, whether that's physical or emotional trauma, I love to use rose for that. So huge fan of rose. And then ginger can especially be helpful if a woman is having pain but kind of scanty flow. It can help to encourage a little bit more flow. So that's helpful for some. Okay, and then bleeding. And this category, we can also call it an emmenagogue, which is the word that we use, a term for herbs that encourage menstruation. Emmenagogue is how you spell that. And some of these herbs in this category are emmenagogues, meaning that they will encourage menstruation. So if you're having like just a scanty flow or like a lot of spotting before blood really starts to flow, these can be really helpful. They are different than abortifacients. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just encouraging a little bit more flow. They shouldn't be used during early pregnancy though, right? Or sometimes at all during pregnancy, because they can encourage more the possibility of a miscarriage. So, and then some of these are would lean more towards abortifacients, like pennyroyal or rue, which I don't ever really use. It can cause a lot of really heavy bleeding. So, okay, so let's go back up to the top. Calendula, catnip, very, very gentle, very easy to use. This is calendula flowers that we're seeing here on the screen. Ginger, like I said, is also a nice, relatively gentle emmenagogue, and it's nice for the digestive system. So is catnip. So if a woman is having like, sometimes you can get digestive cramping or diarrhea or things like that at the beginning of menstruation. It's also nice for that, or nausea, ginger's really nice for. And then we have some herbs at the bottom that are a little bit more astringent and helpful for if there's excessive bleeding, right? So sage can be helpful for that. Yarrow is really a nice balancer, so it will either reduce or encourage menstruation, which I know can be confusing, has a lot of different constituents. And what I believe and have noticed and feel strongly with herbal medicine is that the body chooses the constituents that it needs. And so if you take yarrow and you need to reduce blood flow, it will help you do that, because those are the things, the constituents the body are using. If you take yarrow and you need to increase the flow a little bit, it will help you do that. And then rose, again, is a little bit more of a tonic and astringent to the reproductive system and the uterus. So then we're getting into the estrogen phase. And one of the things, well, actually, I'll talk about that in a minute. So the first herbs that we're talking about here are hormone balancers. And these are really useful for anything ranging from like irregular cycles to PMS to menopausal symptoms, to amenorrhea, which is no menstruation. So if the cycle is having trouble, if that hormonal balance is off, if it's not doing that estrogen, progesterone, beautiful dance that it should be doing, these are herbs that can be really helpful for that. I use these a lot for hormone balancing. So, and this is Vitex berries there on the screen. And that's one of my favorite herbs for hormone balancing. I think it's amazing. So, okay, so some nice herbs for that. Phytoestrogens, and this is a term that honestly we could spend hours just talking about this category. Because we don't have that much time, what I am going to say is that plants don't have human estrogen. They don't contain human estrogen. So what phytoestrogen means is plant estrogen. And there are different ways that our bodies interact with these constituents, these phytoestrogens, that help us to, and I'm just going to make it super simple, to basically balance our own estrogens in our own body. And so without going into great detail, because we don't have time and it is a huge rabbit hole, I'll just say, I'll just leave it at that. So this is Angelica, which is native to the Rocky Mountains. And there's lots of different species of Angelica. We have some really nutritive herbs in this list. So like alfalfa, red clover, those are both like mineral rich, which I think is very, really nice to support the reproductive system, is those high minerals, nutritive herbs. So those are a couple. And then we range from black cohosh, which is really commonly used as kind of a phytoestrogenic support for hot flashes and menopausal symptoms and menstrual cramps and things like that. We have a couple of the ginsengs, Panax ginseng, which is our Asian ginseng, it's red ginseng, and then Panax quinquefolium, which is our native North American ginseng. licorice, which we also saw in the hormone balancing category. And you'll start to see like a lot of these herbs will be in lots of different categories as well. Um, so there's licorice again, and it has lots of saponins in it, which are some of those phytoestrogens. The only one on this list that I really am pretty careful with is soy. And the reason that I am is because soy is genetically modified. A lot of soy is genetically modified. And so that is really, I think and also a lot of people eat a whole lot of soy, right? In different ways. And so I think we can overdo that one. And I would really encourage you to get non-genetically modified. Um, and then the other one, I'll say Trillium is not an herb that I ever use. It's on this list, but it is a very fragile plant. And so I would really encourage you, it's nice to know that it's medicinal and it does those things, but I would encourage you to never ever use it. And false unicorn is another plant on this list that I would only use if it was grown, if it was not wildcrafted, but organically grown, and you can get it that way. Then we have reproductive tonics, and this is a great category um, for excessive menstruation, or for if there's some kind of lack of tone of the reproductive tissue, and especially the uterus. So what we want is we want those muscles in the uterus to be really strong and be able to like close off really well, and that helps to stop excessive bleeding or flooding and those types of things. And these herbs will help to strengthen and tone those muscles and that tissue. So you can use them regularly when you're just as reproductive tonics. You can use them postpartum. So after childbirth is a really, really nice time to strengthen the uterus after it's done all that work. You can also use them if there's like prolapsed uterus or something like that. But honestly, I feel like some of these things are things that would just are nice for everyone, right? So like raspberry, it's just such a great nutritive tea, and really accessible. So this is raspberry in the picture, and there's little flower buds there. Um, okay, Michela is another one that we haven't talked about yet. That's a really nice reproductive tonic as well. It's also called partridge berry. And then we have herbs for fertility. And again, this is a huge, you can see many, many different plants on this list. It is, and they can be used for, a lot of these can be used for men or for women. Um, sometimes I'll work with someone who says, "Oh no, I don't want to be fertile. Like I don't want to have a baby right now, right?" And that's not really what it's about. Although yes, we can certainly use these herbs in that way, carefully, depending on if a woman's pregnant or not. And so we got to use a little finesse there, because not all of them are good for pregnancy. But what I more think about is the cycle, the fertility cycle, right? That we want to make sure that we have our estrogen phase, ovulation, progesterone phase, and that that's going really, really well, right? And fertility is, to be fertile, you have to ovulate, right? And so to me, this list is more about, you can use it in different ways, but it doesn't matter if you want to have a baby or not. Being fertile or using herbs for fertility helps make sure that whole cycle's happening well. And so if a woman is having like amenorrhea, which means no menstruation, which therefore means no ovulation, right? Which means the reproductive system is not doing something that it's made to do, right? And so that to me is a big red flag, like, ooh, something's wrong here. This whole system isn't functioning like it's meant to, you know. And if someone isn't taking some kind of a pharmaceutical birth control to like suppress that system from doing that cycle, something's wrong. It doesn't have something it needs. And that could be nutrition. That could be, like either what someone's eating or how they're absorbing nutrients. It could be stress. It could be body weight, like they maybe are very, very thin. Maybe they're like an athlete or have an eating disorder or something like that. So there's all kinds of reasons that could make this cycle not happen. But that the cycle is happening is actually really very normal and good, right? And so we want to see that happening. It should be. It's what the reproductive system is meant to do. So we won't go over all of these, but you can see there's just a whole bunch of herbs in here. And some of them are more like hormone balancers, right? And some of them are more for the tissues to like tone and strengthen the tissues. Some of them are really nutritive, like nettles and red clover. Some of them are actually adaptogens, which means they help the body um, balance and work with stress, and so that we don't have these big stress shifts as much in the body. And I don't know if you remember me saying this, but early on I said stress really affects the estrogen phase of the cycle. Stress can very much impact fertility and the entire reproductive cycle. So adaptogens help our body adapt to stress, basically. And those would be things like rhodiola, the ginsengs in there, the Panax ginseng and the Panax quinquefolium. Ashwagandha is in there. Um, Eleuthero is another one. So a lot of adaptogens in there. Okay, and then we have ovulation, which like we looked at that chart. Remember, we have that spike of luteinizing hormone that lasts for about 12 to 24 hours. This is motherwort up close with its sweet little flowers. And then we head into the progesterone phase after ovulation has occurred. And so then we have again, and herbs do not contain progesterone either. But then we have some herbs that can help to support the progesterone phase, right? And this is wild yam in this picture. But we also have flaxseed meal, peony, and vitex as well. And again, we have these hormone balancers. This is the same list that was in the estrogen phase, right? Because hormone balancers work all cycle long. You don't need to, and actually so do reproductive tonics and things like that as well. So I included them again on this side because I feel like it's really important to use them the entire cycle if there's a hormonal imbalance happening. And then we have some herbs to reduce bleeding. And I have these actually at the end of the progesterone phase, because if we know that our menstruation is coming and we can prepare if we have excessive menstruation or heavy bleeding, we can actually prepare for that before menstruation starts. And so if I'm working with a woman who has heavy bleeding, I'll say, like, if you can catch it a day or two before and start using these herbs, it can be really, really helpful to reduce that heavy flow. And I've seen amazing, amazing results, literally eliminating that excessive menstruation with some of these herbs and with some of those reproductive tonics and strengtheners like raspberry. So this list, let's see here, we have some that are like raspberry is on here, and lady's mantle, which are just very gentle and toning and strengthening. Probably my very favorites, I have a 3-part that I use here that I love and I've found works so good. I use the tincture in equal parts of cottonroot bark, fresh cottonroot bark tincture, yarrow flower, and shepherd's purse, fresh shepherd's purse. And I take those three, I tincture those three different herbs, put them together in a formula, and I have women or someone who's excessively menstruating just take the drops pretty regularly, and that will help with that. Isn't it interesting again that yarrow is on the encouraging menstruation and on reducing bleeding, and so is ginger, right? On both of those. So, and then we have cinnamon, which is a hemostat, as is yarrow and shepherd's purse, which means that they reduce bleeding, right? So that's can be very, very helpful as well. So these, what I guess what I'm saying is some of these herbs work in different ways, right? And but they accomplish a similar thing, and you can use them together, and what I call layering them, where you're using maybe, like I said, the three herbs, cottonroot, yarrow, and shepherd's purse together. So you kind of layered them up, and they work in what I call a gestalt, which is like all the parts work together to create something kind of bigger, right? Which is, I feel like, what a whole plant medicine does. It works together, right? It's not just like a pharmaceutical, like a single constituent. It's much more complex, much more complicated, and much more useful because the body can pick and choose, you know, what it needs to use. So what it needs at the time. So anyway, that's an example of that kind of layering and the gestalt. Okay, so here again is the menstrual map, and let's go ahead. John is helping me out here, so let's go ahead and put that in, if we can, the comments, and also in Facebook Live, and then we will put a link in YouTube as well if you look down below. The other thing that I want to offer you guys is I created a recipe sheet, and I don't have those recipes here with me, but it's a free download that you guys can download. And I think there's about 5 different recipes. There's a really sweet bath salt, and there's a tea, and there's a belly rub, like an oil that you can rub on your abdomen. And there's a tincture formula for hormone balancing. So there's all these different herbal recipes that you can create. And one of the things that I have to say that I love to do with that is make a little menstrual basket for a young person who is getting ready to menstruate. And just if you combine all those, and maybe like a little health journal or a menstruation journal, maybe a little herb book or a candle or whatever. It's just such a sweet present. And what I recommend is do it early, like get it for them before, you know, before menstruation is really, like a year or two before. And you could even slowly add things in, and let them see it and say, hey, this is gonna, you know, when you start bleeding, like this is your awesome celebration basket, right? And they might even tell you, like, oh, I really want, you know, I don't know, a menstrual pad in there, or a menstrual cup, or a candle, or some artistic supplies, you know, or whatever. And that way there's something to like celebrate and look forward to, and you can and it gives opportunity to open discussion and talk about things as well. So okay, so tonight I really do want to leave a little bit of room for questions. And I know if you do put any questions in the chat, I will try to take a look at that. But I know John is also kind of maybe looking through those a little bit. I may not be able to answer them all, but I would love to answer some questions along the way here. So we talked about menstruation. What does healthy menstruation look like? What can it tell us about our diet, our lifestyle, our stress levels, our health and well-being of our body? It's an amazing tool for that. We talked about that hormonal reproductive cycle. We talked about the menstrual map, and then we focused on some specific herbs in there that are good for reproductive and health and well-being. So once again, if you weren't here in the beginning, we do have our herbalist certificate program. We're offering $300 off of that. It's going to be online this year, and or it actually starts the beginning of next year, in February, very beginning of February. But anyway, right now there's a great discount for that if you're interested. And we do have next week our last free and online class coming up, Herbs for Your Last Nerve, which John is going to be giving, John Goykovich. And that will also be in the link. So if you want to register for that, actually both of those, the Herbalist Certificate Program and the Herbs for Your Last Nerve class, will both be in that link. All right. So there is our slideshow presentation. And now, let's see here. Okay, so now I am back in the screen here, and I'm just gonna look at some, oh, you guys have been asking some awesome questions. Okay, so Aunt Flo, I see, that's great. Latin name for rose is Rosa, R-O-S-A. And then the species depends. There's so many different rose species. Oh, good. And John already said that. Oh, the link for the map isn't working. Okay, so John. Okay. Let's see. Oh, Vitex gave me headaches and bloating. Why? So, okay, let's talk about that. And the rest is, how much should one take in a tincture form, and when should you take it, and how long should you take it? Great questions about Vitex. So, Vitex does give some people headaches, and it isn't for everyone. It can also be used, very interestingly, for headaches, especially associated with menstruation. So isn't that interesting? And like I said, it's just not the best herb for everyone. So generally how I like to use Vitex is, it's best to use it within a half an hour of waking up, because that's when you kind of set your hormonal rhythm for the day. And so how I like to do it is as a tincture, and I like to take about 40 drops of the tincture within a half an hour of waking up. And you can take it 3 times a day, but that first dose is the most important. And what I would say is, if it gives you a headache and bloating, I wouldn't recommend it, Christine. I would suggest trying one of those other hormone balancers and seeing if that doesn't do a better job for you. Okay, let's see here. What else? Touch on some herbs that are good for menopause: hot flashes, bloating, and restlessness. And this is Rojun, my dear friend. I would love to talk about that. So Rojun, I hear ya. And I have to say, like, for me, I have had, I think about 4 years now of hot flashes and menopausal symptoms, and nothing has really resolved it for me. And I've always had a lot of reproductive stuff, so I'm kind of not surprised. But let me talk about, one of the super popular herbs is black cohosh. And again, that can be used as a tincture. It can also be used as like a capsule, is pretty common. Sage, Salvia officinalis, which is garden sage, is one that people use a lot. And one of my favorites is motherwort, which is really nice for hot flashes. And it's also kind of like calming and relaxing. It's good for the heart. It's probably one of my favorite menopausal herbs. And I think it would help with the restlessness. For bloating, let me think here. I'm trying to like put them together in more of like a picture for all of that together. I'm not coming up with anything right now. That I'm sure there is something, it's just not coming to my head. So I'm gonna just like mull that over as I keep moving here and see if I can't think of something else. But Vitex is another really good one, which is more of like a hormone balancer and helps kind of transition us. And just one other thing I'll say about menopause is that menopause is actually like a huge, it's like menarche, right? It's that transition from, which is going into menstruation, and it takes years. And we watch our daughters do that, right? It takes years and years for that to happen. And menopause is the same way. It takes years to like move through that progression. And so I it's a journey, and there's no like, you know, and I just really have experiences. There's no just something that's going to make it go away, just like with menarche, you know. So it's like our body is learning to wean off of all those hormones and that cycle and things like that. And it is a big transition in a lot of ways. Um, okay, does raspberry refer to the fruit or is it raspberry leaf? It's actually, you can use either, but normally we use the leaf, the fresh green, newer leaves. Oh, Patricia, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm delighted. Okay. I don't find glycerides to be as effective as tinctures. So glycerides are considered tinctures. It's just vegetable glycerin versus like alcohol to extract the medicinal properties. It's not quite as strong. It tastes sweeter. And if you have some kind of an issue with alcohol, then I think glycerides are great. They're great for kids and animals. I really like them, but they aren't quite as strong. Okay, herbs in particular for PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and that is a big complicated one, Georgia. So, mm, do you mind if it is 7 p.m. I apologize. I don't think we're going to be able to get to that. Um, let's see here if there's anything else here that's quick. Oh, Angelica for bloating. John, great suggestion for Rojoon. Yes, thank you. So that's a great, there we go. So that's a really nice one. Angelica for the reproductive system, great also for the digestive system and good for menopause. So thanks, John. Um, okay, so Amber has a question. Do you recommend tincturing or tea, or how do you use motherwort? I really like to do the tincture, and because the tea is unbelievably bitter. I don't know if you've ever tried the tea, Amber, but I do not like the tea. So I do the tincture. I also like it because if it's for hot flashes and things like that, it works really fast. So oh, and then Fumi, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say your name, but peppermint for bloating. Yeah, yes, absolutely. You're right. It absolutely is good for bloating. Good idea. Oh, and then Ashley says there are some questions in Q&A, which no, that's not wrong at all. Oh, Savannah. Okay, we're going over just a tiny bit here, you guys, but this is a great question. How do you bring it up to a 3-year-old? Just say it's part of life, as well as death. And so for menstruation, I assume. And you know how I honestly brought it up with my kids? They brought it up to me. So we have a little tiny house and everybody's always in the bathroom with everybody else. And when they were little, I don't know, you never get any privacy in the bathroom when your kids are little, do you? I never did. Anyway, my boys would come running in all the time, and if I was bleeding, I remember my little guy asking when he was about 3, like, "Are you hurt?" And I said, "No, this is totally fine. It's safe. This is I do this every month, and this is called menstruation. It's totally safe and normal." And he was like, "Oh," and then he kind of ran off, you know, and that's about all we said about it that time. But it started that conversation, right? Um, so I kind of tended to let them kind of lead the way with that. And then at key points, I would really introduce the topic more and go more in depth, kind of to their tolerance, you know, with it. And this is for my boys. And anyway, I find like they'll ask me anything now and I'll answer anything. And that's part of my, like, I'm very comfortable talking about it, right? I know that not everyone is in that position, but it's worth stretching and getting comfortable. You can say the words, you know, penis, vagina, whatever, like say them. And then later you'll be ready to say them when you know, want to talk to your kids about that kind of thing. So Ashley says, do you ever recommend evening primrose oil? Help soften the cervix if it's causing pain during the cycle? Yeah. And that's a great idea, Ashley, because it also works locally with those prostaglandins that can cause inflammation and pain during menstruation to those local tissues. So, love that idea of evening primrose oil. It's a great idea. And there's Denna. Gosh, so many great people in here that I love. Um, is it the luteal phase that is less than a day long? No. So the luteal phase is about 2 weeks. It's 10 to 14 days, and it's the progesterone phase. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Um, What's the best herb to help with cramps for someone young? I really like cramp bark. I like black haw. I like raspberry. Those would probably be, oh, and also maybe lady's mantle. Like those are some really nice, gentle, supportive. And then if it's a little bit stronger cramps, if those aren't doing the trick, Ashley, you might um, add in some wild yam. Yeah. Can you ovulate if you don't get your period? No. So it always goes like this: first estrogen, then ovulation, then menstruation. So sometimes, so you can't, if you're not ever getting your period, then you're not ovulating, Christine. And for older women to conceive, I would look at those fertility herbs that we talked about. Um, okay. Well, I just want to thank you all so much for coming. I was a little shy at first, but I'm just so glad that you came, and I hope that you found it useful. And I hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Interested in learning more? We have lots of herbal articles and recipes online.